So let's talk about assets. So I encourage you to follow along with me as I explain each asset. Follow along using your checklist and go on that Kiplinger site. So you can just enter in as I talk about each of them. And you can pause at any time if that's helpful. So first, let's start with cash, what we consider cash. So checking accounts and savings accounts, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with. So that's just your regular old type of bank, like your debit card. I have a checkings and savings account at Bank of America. So that's pretty simple. Next, we have CDs, which is a certificate of deposit. So basically, CDs are amazing. And the reason they're amazing is because instead of having a savings account where you have a very low interest rate, and interest rate being high in this situation is amazing because the higher interest you have, the more money you're getting, right? So CDs have a higher interest rate, typically around like a 2%-ish, higher even. And so all you have to do is keep your money in that bank for a specified length of time. So either 6 months or 1 year or 2 years, etc. But that's the only thing that you have to be cognizant of, is that you have to keep it in the bank for a specified length of time. Now, I think CDs are amazing for saving money for long-term investments such as buying a home. So if you're saving for a mortgage and you say, oh, I'm going to save for 2 or 3 years, well, this is really great because you can just put your money in a CD. You know you're not going to use it in 2 or 3 years. So that money will accumulate more interest than you just throwing it in your savings account. So next is savings bonds, and those are debt securities issued by the U.S. Department of the Treasury to help to pay for the U.S.'s borrowing needs. So they're sold at face value. So what that means is if you pay $50, you're getting a $50 bond. And then the bond is going to be worth its full value upon redemption. And then you accumulate interest, and luckily that interest will be issued to you electronically to your designated account. So it works just like a savings account, a CD in that sense. So next is under the mattress. Now, you never want to put your money under the mattress. Okay, never say never, but it's not the best investment, right? You want your money to accumulate interest. And if anything, you want it in the checking account, so at least it has more security. The checking account doesn't accumulate interest, but at least it has the security of the bank, right? And the backing of the FDIC, which is a government entity. So do not keep your money under a mattress. Doesn't even matter if there's a fire or not, just don't do it. Okay, next is retirement savings. So we have IRAs first. An IRA is an individual retirement account. So I love IRAs. I love the Roth IRA in particular. I think it's amazing. The beauty of Roth IRAs is that you pay the taxes now, and then it accumulates interest-free. So then in 30 years, say it's in your retirement account, the Roth IRA, in 30 years you retire, you don't have to pay taxes on that, and all the money that you accumulated is tax-free. Wonderful. That's opposed to a 401k, which is next. A traditional 401k. There are Roth 401ks, but let's talk about a traditional 401k where you don't pay taxes now, but then you pay taxes in the future. Okay. But then you have to pay taxes on all the money you gained that 30 years. So if you only put in $30,000 and then your money grew by $70,000 and now you have $100,000. Oh man, now I have to pay taxes on that $70,000, you know? So I love the IRA for that, but it's particularly a Roth IRA, because you can also have a traditional IRA. So these are just various investment accounts. So Keogh plans, Keogh accounts, they're basically a retirement account for self-employed people and small businesses in the US. A pension is a fund into which a sum of money is added during an employee's employment years, and from which payments are drawn to support the person's retirement from work in the form of periodic payments. So we typically don't see pensions that much anymore, which is sad, but you might encounter a pension while working. So keep your eye out for that, because that would be great for your retirement. So let's talk about other investments and brokerage accounts. So stocks. Stocks are simply ownership in a company. So let's say you bought a stock of Google. That basically is saying that you have some ownership in Google. And Google is a volatile company, right? They're doing super well, of course, but they're volatile. It's a company. You have no idea how they're managing it. You have no idea about the day-to-day workings at Google. You don't know if they're going to go into a lawsuit, or you have no idea what's going to happen in the future. So because stocks have so much risk, you have a higher return for that risk typically. So stocks are just simply an ownership in the company, and they're great for investments. Next is bonds. So bonds, we kind of talked about in some senses with savings bonds, but bonds is basically you just buying the debt of the US government, right? And so for buying that debt, you get interest payments, right? They hold on to it and then they give you a return. And bond returns are pretty good, right? I mean, if you want a safe investment, you definitely should be putting your money into bonds, because it's like a 5 to 6% interest rate. So even though stocks can be around, before inflation, could be around 10%, right? And bonds are only 5 to 6%. It is a great safe investment, because bonds is basically saying, I have faith in the US government. I have faith that they're going to pay me back my money and also give me interest. Coupon payments is what they call it. So next is mutual funds. So mutual funds is a professionally managed investment fund that pools money from many investors to purchase securities. So there's advantages and disadvantages to doing this. So mutual funds have a multitude of, it could be stocks, it could be bonds, it could be a mix. They have a mix of a lot of things. I particularly like index funds, which is a type of mutual fund. And an index fund is basically just a combination of stocks. But say you have an index fund of the S&P 500. And the S&P 500 is just basically kind of following like the top 500 companies in the US, give or take. Public companies, not private, public. And so, yeah, now we can not only buy Google, but we can buy Amazon, we can buy Facebook, we can buy Coca-Cola, we can buy Johnson & Johnson, we can buy Anheuser-Busch, right? We can get a lot of different industries, and it's a diversified portfolio, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. And so it's not actively managed, meaning that you're not going to have someone like actively changing everything and then charging you a huge fee for doing that, because they have to pay, their light bills and pay their employees. It's passive. You're just following the market, right? And what the market does is how much money you're going to accumulate off of interest, right? So I love mutual funds, particularly index funds. And then we have other. And then we also have the value of businesses you own, right? So that's another investment if you own a business. So let's move on to life insurance, and annuities. So first we have the cash value of life insurance. So that could be your permanent life insurance, whether it's whole life or whatever. if you accumulate a cash value, that could be worth something. And then we have the surrender value of an annuity, which is equal to the total of your premiums and any investment income that accumulated to that date, minus any withdrawals or loans you've already taken. So next we have the current market value of homes. So we have your primary residence, which makes sense. A lot of us know this is like an asset. And in fact, for a lot of people, this is their largest asset, right? And then next we have rental or vacation properties. Let's even add in Airbnb here. That income from Airbnb. So next is property. So property is just things like your car. Let's talk about that for a second, or even like the motorcycles, RVs, and the boats. Because some people will say, well, it's not an asset. We're going to get into this later, what's a good and a better asset. But I like to consider cars and motorcycles and RVs and boats to be an asset, just because you can sell it, right? And you can get money for it. Yes, you might lose a total net value, right? So you might, owe $20,000 on your car, but the car is now only worth $15,000 because of depreciation. Oh, ooh. So now you still have kind of a loan payment of $5,000. But I like to include it in assets because it is worth something, right? It's just depreciating, right? It's an asset, it's just depreciating. And same what could be considered with motorcycles, RVs, or even boats. But I'm not sure about motorcycles and RVs and boats because I don't own them. But they could be appreciating. But typically we know with cars, they're depreciating in value, right? But they're still a depreciating asset. So next we have household furnishings, we have appliances, we have jewelry, we have antiques, we have collections, and we have other. So again, these are the types of things that you can sell. And some of these things can actually appreciate in value. With jewelry or household furnishing or antiques or collections, you can often see that over time, the artistic factor is going to appreciate that asset. But not always the case, but again, you can sell it for some value. So let's get into this important point. And I hope you went along and put in the value for each of those assets so you know that. Now let's stop and take a moment to talk about good assets versus better assets. So good assets. Homes. So sometimes homes could either be in each category, right? So homes could be in good or it could be in better. Okay. Hindsight is 2020. You moved to San Francisco in the 1990s. You buy a home for $150,000. Now today in 2019, that $150,000 house is now worth $3.5 million. Okay, yeah, I would call that a better asset. Yes. But the reality is that a lot of homes aren't appreciating that much, especially when you take into the fact of inflation. So say inflation is like 2%. Might not be that this year, but let's say it's 2%, right? Let's be conservative. Say inflation. And inflation is basically just saying like your money is worth less in the future, right? It's all it's saying. Your money is worth less in the future. So if your house, say, is appreciating by 5% a year, so every year your house is gaining in value by 5%. Cool. Awesome. But inflation's increasing by 2%, so you're getting a 3% return on your investment. And so in some senses, it would have just made more sense for you to just hold a stock that increased by 10%. Inflation is 2%. You have an 8% return on investment in that sense, right? So be careful about thinking that your home can be your only good investment. So next is cars. Cars, like we were kind of talking about before, they're a good asset. I mean, they're an asset. I think some people would just say they're kind of like flat out a bad asset. And how I would define a bad asset is an asset that is worth less than the owner says it's worth. So how we were talking about before, you're in debt by $20,000 for your Honda CRV, but it's only valued at 15 grand. So you have a deficit there, right? So some people would say a car is just a bad investment. I think it's just a good investment. It is what it is. Because a lot of us need to have a car, and for sure it's better to just buy your car in cash, right? But just because it's a depreciating asset, it's an asset nonetheless, you know. So next is computers. Computers is a similar thing. It's a depreciating asset, right? You know, you might have bought a Mac for $1,000, but now it's worth $700 if you want to sell it. This is depreciating, right? And then cash, right? We talked about inflation just now. And so if you're just having your cash sitting in your checking account or sitting underneath your mattress, it's worth less tomorrow. Every day is just sitting there. It's worth less. Is cash a great thing to have? Yes. There's a saying, cash is king. Cash is king. It's all about the cash flow. But the reality is if it's just kind of sitting there, the world is moving, the world is changing, and the next day is going to be worth less. So let's talk about better assets. And better assets is all about having your asset worth more in the future. So notice that good assets are kind of like your asset is probably going to be worth less in the future in some senses, right? Except for homes, right? But I just wanted to put homes in the good assets so we could talk about it, right? I wanted to talk about that. But it could be a better asset, as we have in our first point. Homes. It can be a better asset. It could be definitely worth way more in the future than it is worth now. So we have to always keep that in mind. But also have our side eye on the fact that it could be depreciating in some senses. It could be a huge crash. It could not be keeping up with inflation. It depends on where we live. We have to be cognizant of those details. So stocks, we talked about stocks. Stocks are amazing, right? They have such a high return. Their return is so high. Bonds has a great return too, and it's so safe. We trust in the US government. It's so safe. Peer-to-peer lending. So this is a new thing where you can lend to each other, which is great because you can charge interest for that, right? So it's like a bond. It's making us money. CDs we talked about. CDs are great because it's better than just keeping it in a savings account where you're getting such little interest. CDs is a safe place to get a decent amount of interest, right? Maybe around 2%. REITs. REITs are my favorite. Real estate investment trusts. Let's talk about REITs for a second because I'm in love with them. And I myself almost don't, we're going a little bit forward, but with rental properties and rentals, I myself kind of don't even want a rental property and rentals. I almost just want a REIT. Reason being is because REITs have a higher return than stocks. So on average, it's about like 12% before inflation. So that could be 10% after inflation using our numbers consistently. So REITs are really cool because basically it's like a stock. You have like ownership in all of this real estate. So that could be apartments, it could be health centers, retirement homes, commercial buildings. And so basically these people are doing their jobs, they're managing these businesses, and then you just get a return, and you can also get dividends, which is just a payout every so often. So it could be monthly, it could be yearly, right? So REITs are amazing because it's more diversified than just saying having one rental property or only having your home as your real estate holding. It just is a multitude of properties that you're heavily invested in. So I love REITs. And so next we have rental properties and rentals, which are also an amazing investment. Reason being is that you can have a huge return with a rental property, right? So if we say REITs have a 12% return, people could say you can have a 20% return or whatever return with a rental property. The only risk there is that you kind of need expertise. You need to build a skill set to do rental properties and just rentals in general really well. So once you build that expertise, though, that's your job, that's your business, that's your passion, you can definitely have super high returns, but you need to know what you're doing. We also have real estate crowdsourcing, so putting money together to invest in real estate and then getting a return from that, much like a stock, right? So you're investing, putting all your money together, and then you're getting some return out of it. Businesses, obviously, all the people that are on that Fortune 500 list that we talked about in terms of net worth, the reason they have a high net worth is probably because of their business, right? So businesses are a huge investment and they can have such a high return. I mean, let's be real, like out of all of these, businesses can truly have the highest return, right? If you create Google, if you create Facebook, it's a high return. Obviously, we don't all need to be that, right? We don't all need to be that. But they can have a really high return for you in terms of an asset. And then last is private equity investing. And so private equity investing is simply this. Think about people that invested in Facebook in the beginning. So they said, okay, I'm going to give Facebook $1 million and hopefully pray to God or whoever you're praying to the dirt, who cares? Hopefully they actually return me my money, give me back my $1 million, and then also give me more. So that clearly happened. If the people who invested $1 million in Facebook 15 years ago, probably, who knows how much money they have, but probably hundreds of millions, right? So that's what private equity investing does. But it's huge risk, right? Because you're saying, oh my gosh, who is actually going to run their business properly? Can I trust them, right? And it's very much so even like a stock, right? Where you're kind of saying the same thing even with stocks, right? I'm going to put money into this place and, hopefully they actually make more money to help me out. But yeah, so we've gone over good assets versus better assets. And now I hope you have a clear picture of it all. But this is going to give you the clearest picture of all. Don't be afraid of risk. I want to say this because there's a reality to this situation and just how our economic system works. So since the S&P 500's index creation, it's had a return of 10%, and I've been harping on that. And remember that saying, history repeats itself. And then you think about bonds, and they really have no risk. And I've been harping on it, the fact that it's 5 to 6%. So here's the thing. If you don't play this game, you're going to be screwed. Like, why not play this game? It's a simple game. You're going to miss out on all of the growth. It's really simple. You need to be investing. You need to be investing in better assets. Because that's just how the system works, That's just how it is. That's what everyone else is doing. You need to think of it that way. That's what everyone else is doing that understands the system, right? So now that we're informed, let's go forward and let's invest in better assets. And let's increase our net worth.